General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, March 12 reveal that Porsha refused to entertain Rick's idea for even a second, unwilling to acknowledge the sheer madness of his latest scheme. Bringing Heather back was out of the question. It was reckless, dangerous, and completely unthinkable. Heather was chaos incarnate, a woman whose very existence threatened to unravel everything Porsha had worked so hard to protect. The last thing she needed was to open the door to a storm she would never be able to control. But Rick wasn't backing down. He was as methodical as ever, calmly explaining why this wasn't just an option, it was the only option. Porsha didn't want to hear it, didn't want to listen to the slow, calculated logic in his voice, but she couldn't block out the truth of what he was saying. Sidwell was coming for her, moving pieces into place with the precision of a master manipulator. Every step he took, every move he made, was designed to put her in checkmate before she even realized she was on the board. And if she didn't do something now, she wouldn't have a way out when he made his final play. Porsha felt sick, torn between her instincts and the impossible situation closing in around her. Rick wasn't wrong. Sidwell was more than just a problem, he was an executioner, a man who never acted without ensuring that his victims had no chance to escape. Porsha had spent her entire life making careful decisions, avoiding risks, keeping herself and her family as far from danger as possible. But this was different. This was survival. Rick believed that Heather wasn't just a liability, she was leverage. A weapon that, if wielded correctly, could turn the tables before Sidwell had the chance to tighten his grip completely. Heather knew things, held secrets, and thrived in chaos in a way that could be manipulated to their advantage. She wasn't an obstacle, she was a tool, a means to an end. And if they could control her, they could control the narrative. Porsha wanted to scream at him for even suggesting it. Heather wasn't someone anyone controlled. She was a force of destruction, unpredictable, unstable, and utterly untamed. There was no reality where bringing her back into the picture didn't end in disaster. And yet, despite every warning flashing through her mind, despite every instinct telling her to walk away from this, she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear in her gut that Rick might be right. Sidwell had already set his sights on her. The truth about the test results, about what she had done, was a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. No amount of careful maneuvering was going to stop him from exposing her when the time was right. And when that moment came, she would have nothing left, no career, no family, no safety. Rick was offering her a way to fight back. A way to take control of the situation before it was too late. A way to ensure that she wasn't powerless when Sidwell made his final move. But was she truly willing to do this? To let Heather back into her life, knowing exactly what kind of destruction she was capable of. To trust Rick, a man who thrived in the gray areas of morality, to lead her down a path she could never come back from? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, suffocating in its enormity. If she said yes, she wouldn't just be making a deal with Rick, she would be making a deal with the devil himself. And once she crossed that line, there would be no turning back. Carly knew it was time to confront Drew, to finally have the conversation they had both been avoiding for too long. The situation had already spiraled beyond control, and with Willow's impending move to Drew's home, tensions were only escalating. This wasn't just about logistics or making adjustments, it was about power, control, and the shifting dynamics that neither of them were ready to face. Drew had been acting differently, making choices that Carly didn't fully understand. His alliance with Sidwell, his growing distance from those who once meant everything to him, and now, his insistence that Willow move in with him, it all pointed to a man who was trying to build something, but at what cost? Carly had seen this side of Drew before, but never quite like this. There was a coldness to his decisions now, a sense that he was locking her out of the conversation entirely, and Carly wasn't about to let that stand. Willow's move should have been a personal choice, but it felt more like a strategic move, a calculated step in a much bigger plan that Drew wasn't admitting to. Carly couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here, something Drew wasn't telling her. And with every unanswered question, the tension between them continued to mount. She had fought too hard to keep her family together, to ensure that Michael and Willow had the support they needed. Now, with Drew stepping in to take a more dominant role in Willow's life, Carly couldn't help but feel like she was being pushed to the sidelines, left to watch as he built a new version of the life he wanted, one that didn't include her. But Carly wasn't the kind of woman to be dismissed, and she certainly wasn't going to let Drew make choices that affected her family without answering to her first. She was going to get to the bottom of this, to figure out what Drew was really after, and if his motives weren't as pure as he claimed, he was going to regret underestimating her. The coming confrontation was inevitable, and Carly was ready for it. But what she didn't know was that Drew had been preparing for this too. And when they finally faced off, the truth that came out would change everything. Ava was running out of options, and she knew it. The walls were closing in, the threats surrounding her were growing stronger, and there was only one person who could help her now, Nina. Their relationship had always been complex, teetering between fierce loyalty and underlying tension, but this wasn't about friendship or past grudges anymore. This was about survival. Rick had become a problem that she could no longer ignore. His grip was tightening, his manipulation becoming more precise, his actions more ruthless. He wasn't just lurking in the shadows anymore, he was moving boldly, weaving himself into the power structure of Port Charles in a way that could make him impossible to stop if someone didn't act soon. And Ava could feel it, that sinking feeling that if she didn't make a move now, it would be too late. She had watched Rick operate long enough to know that his power didn't come from brute force, but from control. He had a way of making people doubt their instincts, second-guess their decisions, question their alliances. He had built his influence carefully, ensuring that by the time someone realized what he was doing, they were already caught in his web. Ava refused to be his next victim. Turning to Nina wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only logical move left. Nina had resources, connections, and most importantly, influence. She wasn't someone Rick could easily manipulate, and if she played her cards right, she could be the key to dismantling whatever power Rick had begun to amass. But Ava wasn't naive. Nina wouldn't agree easily. She had her own battles, her own problems to handle. Ava knew that Nina had already been dragged into too many dangerous games, and she wouldn't want to be pulled into another one, especially one as messy and unpredictable as this. That meant Ava had to be smart. She had to push the right buttons, lay out the stakes in a way that made Nina see what she stood to lose if Rick wasn't stopped. Because this wasn't just about Ava anymore. If Rick's influence continued to grow unchecked, it wouldn't just be Ava paying the price. Nina's world, her business, her control over her own future, all of it would be at risk. Rick wasn't just playing a game, he was rewriting the rules, making himself the one calling all the shots. And if he got his way, no one would be able to challenge him, not even Nina. Ava laid it all out, painting the picture of what would happen if they didn't act now. Rick would continue to tighten his grip on everything, manipulating, scheming, and positioning himself in a way that ensured he was untouchable. Nina might not see it now, but if she waited too long, it would be too late to fight back. This wasn't just about taking Rick down, it was about taking control before he could completely seize it for himself. Ava had made her request. Now, it was up to Nina to decide whether she would step up and help, or whether she would stand by and watch as everything they had both worked for slipped through their fingers. Either way, Ava was ready for war. Lucky and Liz were slowly finding their way back to each other, caught in the gravitational pull that had always existed between them. No matter how much time had passed or how many obstacles had torn them apart, there was something undeniable about the connection they shared, a love story that had been written in heartbreak, resilience, and fate. At first, it was subtle, small moments of familiarity, lingering glances, conversations that went on just a little too long. They had both been through so much, each carrying the weight of past mistakes and regrets, but there was something comforting about the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to what once was. But as they grew closer, Liz couldn't ignore the storm brewing beneath the surface. This wasn't just about nostalgia or rekindling an old romance. This was about the life she had built, the choices she had made, and the secrets she was still keeping. Lucky saw their reconnection as a fresh start, a second chance at something real, but Liz knew the truth. There was more at play here than just old feelings coming back to life. Her life had become entangled in something deeper, something bigger than just love. There were plans in motion, long-term goals that she had been carefully constructing, plans that Lucky had no idea about. Falling back into this relationship could either be a blessing or a disaster, and she wasn't sure which yet. And then there was the fear. The fear that Lucky would see past the surface, that he would start asking the wrong questions, that he would look too closely at the choices she had made since they had been apart. Liz had always been good at compartmentalizing, at keeping her emotions separate from her actions, but Lucky had a way of seeing through her, of breaking down the walls she worked so hard to build. Their relationship was heading toward a crossroads, one where Liz would have to decide if she was truly ready to let Lucky in again, or if she was simply clinging to a love that no longer had a place in the life she had created. Because the truth was, no matter how much they still loved each other, some things once broken could never be fully repaired. And if Lucky uncovered the real reason Liz was hesitating, there was no telling whether their love story would have a second chance, or if it would be destroyed for good. Alexis had spent her entire life navigating power struggles, legal battles, and moral dilemmas, but what was happening now with Drew felt different, more dangerous, more insidious. She had seen men change before, had witnessed how power, ambition, and desperation could warp even the best of them, but Drew's transformation wasn't just a shift in personality. It was a descent into something much darker. He had become calculating, ruthless, and willing to cross lines that she never would have believed possible. She had tried to ignore the signs, to chalk it up to stress or some misguided sense of responsibility, but the truth was clear, Drew wasn't the same man anymore. And if she didn't do something soon, someone was going to get hurt. That's why she turned to Curtis. She needed someone who could see beyond the surface, who could dig into Drew's new alliances and uncover what was really going on. Curtis had the connections, the instincts, and the ability to get answers in ways Alexis couldn't. He wasn't tied to political games or legal bureaucracy, he worked in the spaces where the law failed, where influence and leverage meant more than rules and regulations. And right now, that was exactly what Alexis needed. But the moment Curtis listened to what she had uncovered, something shifted in his demeanor. Alexis could see it, the gears turning, the weight of what she was telling him settling in, but also the opportunity forming in his mind. Curtis wasn't just interested in helping Alexis, he had his own reasons for wanting to take Drew down. Drew's reach had been expanding, his decisions becoming more unpredictable, and Curtis had already been keeping an eye on him. Drew wasn't just making power plays in the corporate world, he was aligning himself with dangerous figures, making moves that put the entire city at risk. Sidwell, Brennan, and others who operated in the shadows, Drew was brushing shoulders with all of them. And that made him a liability. But Curtis wasn't about to jump into this blindly. He needed leverage, something that could completely dismantle Drew's growing empire, something that would ensure Drew had nowhere left to turn when the time came to take him down. And that's where Alexis came in. Curtis knew that Alexis wasn't just another player in this game, she was someone who had influence, someone people listened to, someone who could shape public perception with just a few well-placed words. If he could get her to use her position carefully, to shine a light on Drew's corruption in the right way, then it wouldn't just be a takedown, it would be a complete unraveling. But Alexis wasn't naive. She could see the way Curtis was thinking, the way he was strategizing even as they spoke. She knew that this wasn't just about helping her because they had a shared history or because he believed in justice. This was about Curtis taking advantage of the opportunity that had just fallen into his lap. And yet, Alexis had no choice. Drew had become a force that couldn't be ignored, and the longer they waited, the worse things would get. Sidwell was already pulling strings behind the scenes, and Brennan was lurking, waiting for the right moment to make his move. Alexis had spent too many years fighting for the truth, for justice, for the protection of those she cared about, and she wasn't about to let Drew become another unchecked threat in Port Charles. So she struck a deal. Curtis would do what needed to be done, uncover what Drew had been hiding, use every connection he had to find out just how deep the corruption went. And Alexis? She would make sure that when the truth came out, it landed exactly where it needed to. But as she left that meeting, a sinking feeling settled in her chest. She had just aligned herself with Curtis in a way she never expected. And as much as she hated to admit it, she wasn't entirely sure if she had just made a deal to stop Drew, or if she had just walked into another trap entirely. One thing was certain, this was only the beginning.